Nobody bothered to scratch Charles Vane's birth into any church ledger. No proud father bragging over ale. No midwife wiping blood from a screaming infant while whispering blessings. He slid into the world the way piss runs down a gutter. Unwanted, unnoticed, already stinking of rot and future violence. Late 1600s London was a meat grinder wearing cobblestones. The air tasted like coal smoke, sour piss, and the sweet rot smell of corpses left too long in alleys until their bellies split and leaked black fluid. Rats the size of small cats fought children for scraps of maggoty bread, their claws scraping skin raw. Open sores ran black with shit and vomit, thick enough to coat the tongue when you breathed. Every inhale scraped the back of your throat like broken glass mixed with rancid fat. Boys like Vane weren't raised. They were endured until they either toughened up or disappeared into the belly of the city without a single soul giving a fuck. He learned the rules before he learned to wipe his own as properly. Watch a man's hands, always the hands. The way knuckles tightened, the way fingers twitched before a backhand split a lip open and sent teeth skittering across the stones like bloody dice. Hesitate and you ate boot leather until your ribs cracked like dry twigs and you tasted hot iron flooding the back of your mouth. Cry out and the beating only got harder, because mercy was a joke told by men who'd never gone hungry. Vane stopped crying early. Instead he started watching. Then he started taking. The first time he felt that cold click in his chest, he was maybe 8, crouched in a piss-slick alley behind a slaughterhouse where the ground was spongy with old blood and offal. A bigger boy, some pox-scarred cunt twice his size, had him pinned, fist raised to cave his face in for a crust of stolen bread. Vane didn't beg. He didn't flinch. He waited until the fist came down, then drove his own small thumb straight into the bastard's eye socket. The eyeball gave way with a soft, wet pop, like a ripe grape bursting underfoot. Warm jelly and blood poured hot over Vane's knuckles, thick and sticky. He kept digging, twisting, grinding his thumbnail deeper until he felt the socket crunch and the older boy started screaming like a stuck pig. High, wet, animal sounds that bubbled with snot and blood. The bigger boy thrashed, piss-soaking his own rags, but Vane kept digging until the screaming turned to wet, choking gurgles and the body went limp beneath him. When the bigger boy finally rolled off, twitching, Vane stood up, spit a thick mouthful of blood and snot onto the writhing face, and took the bread anyway, chewing it with a split lip while the other boy's ruined eye leaked down his cheek. That was the moment something shifted for good. Not fear. Never fear. A quiet, freezing rage settled behind his ribs like a loaded pistol cocked and waiting, cold and heavy and ready to go the hell off. Other gutter rats learned to shrink, to bow their heads, to disappear into the filth. Vane learned the opposite. Pain was coming whether you wanted it or not, so you might as well start dealing it back with vicious interest, hot, wet, and personal. By the time Charles Vane first tasted the sea, the world had already spent years trying to break him, and he had learned the only answer worth giving was to break back harder, with interest paid in hot blood and shattered bone. The ocean wasn't freedom. It was just a wetter, wider slaughterhouse. Wooden hulls groaned and creaked like dying animals in slow agony, planks flexing under pressure that made the whole ship scream. Salt burned into every open cut until wounds suppurated, pus mixing with seawater to create a stinging slime that never dried. Food crawled with weevils that crunched between teeth like grit. Water turned green and foul in the barrels, thick with slime that slid down the throat like spoiled mucus. Men went mad from scurvy, their gums swelling into spongy, bleeding sacs until teeth loosened and fell out with a wet pop, leaving raw sockets that tasted of iron and rot. Sometimes they snapped quietly in the night, throats opened with a hidden knife over half a ration. Sometimes the snap was louder, steel sliding between ribs with a soft, sucking sound, hot blood bubbling around the blade while the victim gasped and clutched at the wound, trying to hold his own life inside. Vane likely cut his teeth during the War of the Spanish Succession, when kings handed out letters of marque and called legalized murder privateering. Out there, in the rolling hell of gunpowder smoke and screaming canvas, violence finally had rules he could respect. Strike first. Strike hard. Never fucking hesitate, because hesitation got your belly opened and your guts spilled across the deck like so much chum, steaming in the cold air while you watched them uncoil from your own body. The cannons didn't roar. They punched the air like God's own fist, the concussion slamming into your chest hard enough to rattle teeth. When a broadside hit, timber exploded into wooden shrapnel that tore through flesh like hot knives through fat. One man was loading powder when a foot-long splinter the thickness of a wrist punched clean through his chest, pinning him to the mast. He stood there for 3 long heartbeats, staring stupidly at the jagged wood jutting from his ribs, then screamed as his lungs filled with blood and he clawed at the shard, fingers slipping in the hot, pulsing flow. Decks didn't just get wet, they turned into red sludge. Blood mixed with seawater, vomit, loose shit from men whose bowels let go in terror, and the sweet rot smell of ruptured intestines. Every barefoot step squelched and sucked, the warm mixture oozing between toes like thick porridge. The stench was thick enough to chew, hot copper, shit, tar, and the sickly sweet reek of torn guts baking in the sun. Vane moved through that slaughter like it was Sunday prayer. He watched men lose arms to chain shot, the limb spinning away still clutching a cutlass while the stump sprayed arterial blood in rhythmic, hot jets that painted the deck and the men nearby. He saw others take a musket ball to the face, jawbone shattering into red mist, teeth and tongue fragments spraying across their mates like wet gravel. He saw the weak ones break, sobbing, pissing themselves in hot streams down their legs, begging God or their mothers while they clutched spilled guts trying to shove the slippery coils back inside their bellies, only for them to slide out again between bloody fingers. He learned to feel nothing. Caring was a luxury that got you killed. Whatever scraps of softness might have lingered from the London gutters were carved out on those blood-slicked decks, not gently, but ripped away in jagged pieces. Each scream, each severed limb, each dying man's final wet gurgle and the warm splash of his blood on Vane's face stripping another layer until only instinct and cold, hard edge remained. When the war finally coughed to its end, most men dreamed of home, farms, wives, warm beds, the lie of peace. Vane looked at that future and saw only another cage. Home was just more boots on your neck, more empty bellies, more bastards pretending there were rules while they fucked you over anyway. Out here at least it was honest. You saw a ship you wanted. You took it. A man stood in your way. You opened his throat with one clean slash, watching the blood pump out in thick, dark pulses that steamed in the cold air until he stopped twitching and the light left his eyes. No sermons. No masks. No fake mercy. So when the Crown expected its hired killers to suddenly grow consciences and crawl back to polite society like whipped dogs, Vane didn't bend. He didn't hesitate. He simply chose the life they feared most. The sea hadn't merely hardened him. It had baptized him in salt and blood, and he rose from those crimson waves something colder, something meaner, a man who no longer ran from violence. He belonged to it, body and soul. By the time Charles Vane limped into Nassau, he wasn't hunting for a home. He was hunting for a place rotten enough to match the monster he had already become. And Nassau answered like a whore spreading her legs in an open sore, stinking and ready. This wasn't a port, it was a festering wound on the ass end of the Caribbean, a sun-blasted spit of sand crawling with cutthroats, rum-soaked lunatics, and men who had torched every bridge back to civilization, then jerked off on the ashes while laughing. No kings. No courts. No priests trying to scrub the blood off their hands with pretty prayers. Just power. You had it, or you got fucked by whoever did, usually with a blade still warm from the last man's guts. The harbor was a graveyard of half-rotted hulks, their broken ribs jutting from the water like the bones of gutted whales left to bleach and stink. The air hung thick with the reek of sour sweat, black powder, cheap rum vomit, and the coppery tang of old blood that never quite washed away, mixed with the sweet rot smell of bodies dumped in shallow graves or simply left where they fell. From the taverns spilled laughter that sounded more like threats, sharp, ugly barks usually followed by the wet crack of a bottle shattering across a skull, the meaty thud of a body hitting the floorboards hard enough to splinter them, or the high, gurgling scream of a man whose throat was being opened ear to ear. Arguments in Nassau didn't end in words. They ended in steel and hot blood. Blades flashed in lantern light. Pistols barked at point-blank range, blowing fist-sized holes through chests so the heart could be seen still twitching and spurting in the smoke. A man who cheated at dice might wake up the next morning with his own severed cock stuffed in his mouth, the stump still leaking, and his throat opened ear to ear so the wind whistled through the gash when he tried to breathe. Fights weren't spectacles, they were quick, brutal executions. 1 second 2 bastards were shouting. The next, one was on his knees trying to shove his spilling intestines back inside with slippery, bloody hands while the winner pissed a hot stream onto the twitching corpse, laughing as the guts uncoiled in the dirt. Vane didn't strut in like some painted peacock looking to build a legend. He moved quiet, eyes dead and measuring. He watched who flinched when steel came out, who talked loud but folded the moment blood sprayed hot and sticky across their face, who bragged about kills but couldn't stomach the sound a man makes when his belly is slit open, the wet, sucking hiss as the guts slide out in a steaming pile onto the floor. When Vane finally acted, it was never loud, never theatrical. It was fast, ugly, and final. A loudmouth in a tavern once shoved him over a spilled tankard. Before the man could laugh, Vane had driven a broken bottle straight into his eye socket, twisting until the glass crunched through bone and the eyeball burst with a soft, wet pop, leaking warm jelly down the man's cheek. The screaming turned into a wet, gurgling whistle as blood and vitreous fluid bubbled from the ruined socket. Another time, a cheating quartermaster tried to short Vane's share. Vane didn't argue. He simply grabbed the man's wrist, slammed it onto the table, and hacked the hand off with a cutlass in 3 savage chops. The first blow cracked bone, the second sent arterial blood spraying in hot, rhythmic jets across the wood. The third severed the hand completely, leaving the stump pulsing and the fingers still twitching on the table like a dying spider. Vane took the coins anyway, stepping over the screaming man while blood pooled under his boots. He didn't join fights. He ended them. Word traveled fast in a shithole like Nassau, not because men gossiped, but because survival meant knowing exactly whose blade you didn't want sliding between your ribs while you slept, warm and wet. Vane's name became one of those quiet warnings. Not the loudest voice in the room, not the one with the fanciest hat or tallest tales. Just the one that made harder men suddenly find reasons to look at their boots when he walked past, the air suddenly thick with the memory of blood. Because Vane had no limits you could see. No line he wouldn't cross with a smile that never reached his dead eyes. Other pirates played at being monsters. Vane didn't play. He simply was one, cold, patient, and already soaked in enough blood that adding a little more never bothered him. By now Charles Vane wasn't just another bastard with a blade. He was becoming something worse, a man who no longer tolerated violence. He craved it. He preferred it. It felt cleaner than any lie of mercy. Out on the open water, where laws dissolved and distance swallowed screams whole, the last rags of restraint burned out of him for good, leaving only cold instinct and hot blood. Other pirates, even the ruthless ones, understood fear as theater. Fire a warning shot across the bow. Run up the black flag. Give the prey a chance to strike their colors so the cargo could be taken clean and profitable. Efficient. Predictable. Vane didn't give a fuck about predictable. When his lookouts spotted a fat merchant ship wallowing on the horizon, it wasn't a negotiation. It was a slaughter. No warning flags. No polite demand to heave to. Just the sudden, ear-splitting roar of cannons ripping iron into wood and meat. The first broadside wasn't meant to scare. It was meant to break. Masts exploded in showers of jagged splinters that tore through sailors like grape shot through soft flesh. One man took a foot-long shard straight through the belly. He stood there for 3 long heartbeats, staring stupidly at the bloody wood protruding from his gut before his intestines slid out in a hot, steaming coil, slapping wetly onto the deck as he dropped to his knees screaming, trying to shove the slippery loops back inside with bloody hands. Hulls cracked open. Men were hurled across decks, ribs shattered, limbs hanging by threads of tendon and skin. Before the smoke even thinned, Vane was already boarding. Boarding was never clean. It was choking, close-quarters hell where the air tasted of gunpowder, hot blood, and the sour stink of men shitting themselves in terror. Cutlasses rang against steel, but steel soon met flesh, and flesh always lost with a wet, meaty sound. Vane didn't duel. He didn't posture. He killed. He moved like a butcher in a frenzy, slashing throats so deep the heads lolled back on flaps of skin, blood jetting in thick, rhythmic pulses that sprayed hot across his face and chest. He fired pistols point-blank into faces until skulls burst in red mist and brain matter splattered the men behind them like warm porridge. A screaming sailor tried to surrender, hands raised. Vane drove his cutlass straight through the man's open mouth and out the back of his skull, twisting the blade until the jawbone cracked with a wet crunch and the body convulsed, piss running down its legs. Another begged on his knees, tears and snot mixing with piss streaming down his thighs. Vane's only response was to hack downward, opening the man from collarbone to navel so his guts spilled across the deck in a wet, steaming pile. He stepped over the twitching body without breaking stride, boots squelching in the fresh coils. If anyone still breathed after the fight, Vane gave no quarter. Ships were stripped, then put to the torch. Survivors were left drifting in open boats with no water, no oars, or sometimes simply thrown overboard with their throats open just enough to bleed slow, thin red ribbons trailing in the water while sharks circled, drawn by the scent. The message wasn't subtle. Cross Charles Vane and you didn't get to walk away. You got to die screaming, knowing exactly who sent you to hell, feeling the salt burn in your open wounds as the sharks began to feed. Compared to Edward Teach, who turned fear into grotesque theatre, smouldering fuses in his beard, smoke pouring like a demon, Vane was colder, simpler, more final. Teach wanted surrender so he could rob and swagger. Vane didn't care if you surrendered. Fear wasn't a tool for him. It was just the thick, coppery smell that followed the butchery, clinging to his skin for days. The more he leaned into that brutality, the casual throat cuttings that left men gurgling on their own blood, the casual burnings where screams rose high and animal as flesh bubbled and popped, the casual indifference to begging, the darker his name grew. Ships that spotted his colors sometimes turned and ran before the first gun even spoke. Crews whispered Vane like saying it louder might summon the devil himself. Because with Vane there was no script, no safe way out, just the cold realization that if he caught you, you were already meat, warm, twitching, and ready to be opened. And that suited him perfectly. By 1718, the Crown had finally grown sick of the pirate cancer rotting the Caribbean. So they sent Woodes Rogers with more than cannons and marines. They sent something far more insulting to men like Charles Vane. A pardon. A clean piece of paper that whispered, "All is forgiven. Just kneel like a good little dog, and we'll pretend you never slit all those throats or burned all those ships while men screamed and bled out on your decks." Plenty of pirates swallowed their pride and took it. Men who had once opened bellies and laughed while guts spilled hot and steaming took the pardon like whipped curs, lining up to trade their cutlasses for the illusion of safety. They called it survival. Vane saw it for exactly what it was, submission dressed up in polite ink. Kneel, the Crown was really saying, and we'll forget what a monster you are. He didn't kneel. He didn't weigh options. He didn't sit in some rum-soaked tavern pondering a quieter life. That life meant rules, leashes, and some powdered wig cunt telling him when he could piss. Vane would rather have his throat opened ear to ear, blood pumping in thick pulses down his chest, than live on his knees. So when Rogers sailed into Nassau harbor expecting sullen surrender, Vane gave him something better. He took a captured sloop, crammed its hold with every barrel of gunpowder he could steal, soaked the decks and rigging in pitch and tar until the wood glistened and stank, and turned the entire ship into a floating funeral pyre. Then he lit it. Flames roared up the rigging like hungry demons, wood crackling and spitting as black smoke billowed thick enough to choke the sun and burn the lungs of anyone downwind. The burning hulk became a drifting inferno, heat warping the air, sparks swirling like angry hornets, the pitch popping and hissing as it melted and dripped in flaming globs. Vane cut the lines and let the fiery monster drift straight toward Roger's fleet. Not as a warning, not as a bluff, as a middle finger carved in fire and smoke. Panic ripped through the harbor. Ships scrambled, crews screaming, lines snapping, men leaping overboard into the water to escape the oncoming blaze. Cannons boomed uselessly as the burning sloop slammed into one vessel, igniting sails and spreading hell across the water. Screams of burning men cut through the chaos, high, animal sounds as flesh bubbled and blistered, clothing fused to skin, hair igniting in bright flares while they thrashed and rolled, trying to smother the flames that ate deeper into meat. The stench of scorched hair and cooking flesh rolled across the water like a thick fog. In that screaming, choking confusion, Vane slipped away. While other captains stood on the beach weighing their chances, choosing the easy road, choosing to bend the knee and live, Vane chose defiance. He chose fire. He chose to spit directly into the face of the most powerful empire on earth and sail off like it was just another Tuesday slaughter, the taste of smoke still bitter on his tongue. That wasn't courage. That wasn't clever strategy. That was pure, absolute refusal, bordering on madness. Because Vane didn't just reject the pardon. He set it ablaze, literally and metaphorically, and used the flames and the screams to light his escape. From that moment there was no going back. No second chances. No quiet retirement in some quiet cove. He had drawn a line in fire and blood. And once you do that, you either keep burning, or you get burned alive. There's a comforting myth about pirates, that they were nothing but chaos with sails, lawless animals rutting and killing on whim. That's horseshit. Even monsters had rules. Crude ones. Bloody ones. But rules all the same. And even Charles Vane wasn't above them. For a while his brutality worked. His name alone kept merchant crews pissing themselves and rival captains giving his ships wide berth. His defiance made him a legend whispered in every rum-soaked tavern from Tortuga to Port Royal. But there's a problem with ruling through fear. Eventually your own crew starts wondering if they're next in line for the blade sliding between their ribs while they sleep. Among his men were names that would later carve their own bloody paths, Jack Rackham chief among them. Where Vane was cold iron and frozen rage, Rackham was slippery calculation and hungry ambition. He knew when to push and, more importantly, when to save his own skin. That difference was a slow fuse burning toward powder. It detonated in late 1718 when Vane's crew sighted a powerful French warship. Bigger guns, thicker hull, the kind of floating fortress that didn't just fight, it ended fights in red mist and floating corpses. For once, Vane chose caution. He refused to engage. It wasn't cowardice. It was cold arithmetic. Charging that beast head-on would have left most of them gutted, limbs sheared off by chain shot, bodies bloating and turning black in the waves while fish nibbled at their open wounds. Survival sometimes meant swallowing pride. But pirates didn't worship survival. They worshipped dominance. To men who had grown drunk on Vane's relentless aggression, his refusal looked like something far worse. Weakness. The whispers started low and poisonous, slithering through the crew like maggots in spoiled meat. Why the fuck are we running? Since when does Vane's balls shrink at the first sight of real steel? We didn't sign on to follow a cunt who flinches when the fight gets real. The whispers found a voice in Jack Rackham. He didn't scream or rage. He simply spoke what everyone was already thinking, his voice calm and cutting. If he won't lead us into a proper fight, maybe he shouldn't be leading us at all. Pirate crews weren't bound by blind loyalty like Navy dogs. They were bound by agreement, and agreements could be ripped apart with a vote. So they voted. Not with blades or blood. With raised hands and cold eyes staring straight at Vane. And Vane, this man who had burned ships, butchered surrendering sailors, and spat in the face of an empire, lost. Just like that. Stripped of command. Stripped of his ship. Cast aside by the very bastards who had followed him through slaughter after slaughter, their hands still sticky with the blood he had ordered them to spill. Rackham took the captain's cabin. Vane was given a small, leaky sloop and a handful of loyalists, men too stubborn, too stupid, or too broken to abandon him entirely. The silence on the deck as it happened was heavier than any broadside. No cheers. No gloating. Just the quiet weight of men who knew exactly what kind of monster they were setting adrift, the air thick with the sour taste of betrayal and the metallic tang of fear. Vane didn't beg. He didn't roar or threaten. He simply stood there, eyes dead and calculating, taking the betrayal the way he took everything else, cold, quiet, controlled. Which was somehow more unsettling than if he had flown into a rage and started opening throats right there on the deck. Because men like Vane don't forget. They don't forgive. They let the betrayal settle deep in their guts like a swallowed razor blade, letting it fester and sharpen until it becomes something even meaner than before. As that little sloop pulled away from the ship that used to be his, the water lapping softly against the hull, Vane wasn't broken. He was still dangerous. Still furious. Still exactly the kind of man you do not want sailing the seas with nothing left to lose but a throat full of swallowed razors and a chest full of cold fire. Because if there's one thing more terrifying than a brutal captain, it's a brutal captain who has been cast aside and left to burn with nothing but rage and time. After the mutiny carved out his command like a dull knife gutting a fish, Charles Vane didn't fade quietly into the horizon. Men like him never did. They kept swinging even when the world started swinging back with broken bottles and heavier chains. With a stripped-down crew and a leaking sloop that barely deserved the name ship, Vane stayed on the hunt, still taking what he wanted, still refusing to bend. But something had shifted. He wasn't building anymore. He was surviving on pure momentum and the kind of rage that eats a man from the inside if it isn't fed fresh blood. The sea has a way of humbling even the meanest bastards alive, and it came for Vane in the form of a storm that didn't give a fuck about reputation. It wasn't some pretty, cinematic tempest with dramatic lightning. This was raw, bone-shaking violence from the sky and deep. Winds screamed like damned souls being flayed. Waves rose like black walls and slammed down with the force of cannon fire, splintering timbers and snapping masts like dry chicken bones with sharp, explosive cracks. Rigging tore loose and whipped through the air like razor wire, slicing flesh and taking fingers with clean, wet cuts that left stumps spraying hot blood. The hull groaned and cracked under pressure no wooden ship was ever meant to survive, planks splitting with deep, moaning sounds like a living thing in agony. Vane's sloop didn't stand a chance. Masts shattered with sharp, explosive cracks that sounded like gunshots. The deck tilted violently, sending men sliding into the churning sea where they were swallowed whole, their screams cut short by salt water flooding lungs and stomachs. One crewman got his leg crushed between shifting cannon and rail. The bone splintered audibly with a wet crunch, white shards jutting through torn flesh as he howled until a wave ripped him overboard, leaving a red trail in the foam. Another was impaled by a flying spar that punched straight through his chest, pinning him to the deck like a speared pig while blood bubbled from his mouth in thick, frothy gouts and his eyes rolled back in shock. Vane clung to the wreckage, salt burning his eyes like acid, rage burning hotter than the pain. Somehow, because bastards like him always seem to cling to life longer than they deserve, he survived the wreck. He washed ashore on a godforsaken spit of sand and rock, half drowned, bleeding from a dozen gashes where coral and debris had sliced him open like a butcher's knife. No crew left. No ship. No power. Just him, the relentless sun, and whatever ghosts of slit throats and burned men had followed him there, whispering in the wind. Picture it, the man who once commanded slaughter, who had watched guts spill across blood-slicked decks and felt nothing, now reduced to crawling on all fours like a dog, scavenging for crabs and licking dew from leaves just to stay alive. Days blurred into weeks. Hunger clawed at his guts like rats gnawing from the inside, sharp teeth tearing at his stomach lining until every movement sent fresh waves of nausea and pain. The sun baked his skin raw and blistered, peeling off in wet, stinging strips that stuck to his rags. Salt crusting every wound until they suppurated, stank of rot, and throbbed with infection. Nights brought cold that sank into his bones, and the kind of crushing silence that forces a man to sit with every scream he'd ever caused, every wet gurgle of a dying throat, every plea he had ignored. Most men would have broken in that emptiness, would have begged the sky for mercy or wept for the life they'd lost, their voices cracking in the wind. Vane didn't break. If anything, the isolation sharpened him like a whetstone on a blade. The rage didn't fade. It festered. It turned hotter, meaner, more focused. Starving, sunburned, alone, skin peeling and wounds leaking pus, he still refused to die quietly. Dying out here, forgotten, shitting liquid from bad water, skin peeling off in strips, body bloating with infection, wasn't the ending he would accept. Not after all the blood he'd spilled. Not after spitting in the face of kings. Eventually, fate tossed him one last cruel bone. A ship passed close enough to spot the ragged, skeletal figure waving weakly from the beach. They put a boat ashore and hauled him aboard, filthy, emaciated, covered in sores and salt crust, but still breathing fire behind his sunken eyes. For one flickering moment it looked like luck. Like the bastard might claw his way back to the slaughter once more. But fate doesn't hand out miracles to men like Charles Vane. It sets traps. The men who pulled him from that island didn't see a survivor. They saw a prize. A notorious pirate with a price on his head. A walking death sentence ready to be collected. He wasn't rescued. He was delivered, bound in ropes that bit into raw, salt-crusted wrists, recognized, and turned in for the bounty like a piece of meat dragged to market. The sea, the only place that had ever made sense to him, was gone. Replaced by iron chains that bit into wrists already raw from salt and struggle, rubbing them bloody and weeping pus. Replaced by the slow, inevitable march toward a cell and a rope. For the first time in years, Vane wasn't the hunter. He was the one caught. And the world he had spent his life defying was finally ready to close its fist around his throat and squeeze until the last spark of defiance guttered out. By the time Charles Vane reached Port Royal, the fight was already over. Not in some glorious, last-stand blaze of gunfire and spilled guts. No. This ending was quieter, slower, and somehow meaner for it. Chains don't give a fuck how many throats you've opened or how many ships you've burned. Iron is iron. It bites deep into wrists already raw from salt and struggle, rubbing the skin away until open sores weep pus and every small movement sends fresh stabs of pain up the arms. The metal grows hot in the sun and cold at night, never letting the flesh heal, never letting the mind forget it is trapped. Port Royal knew exactly how to deal with men like him. It had seen plenty swagger in and swing out. The streets he was dragged through had once thrived on the same chaos he embodied. Now they lined up to watch the monster finally caged. People stared, some fearful, some spitting thick gobs of phlegm that landed on his face and stung the open cuts, most just hungry for the spectacle of a legend reduced to a filthy, stumbling wreck with dead eyes that still hadn't learned how to beg. Legends don't look like much in chains. No fire. No fury on display. Just a man, crusted in salt and shit, skin stretched tight over bone, sores leaking, but carrying something in those eyes that refused to die. Defiance. Always that. The trial was a joke, a quick formality in a sweltering courtroom that smelled of sweat, fear, old piss, and the faint rot of infected wounds. Piracy. Murder. Defiance of the crown. The charges didn't need witnesses when his reputation had already done the talking in blood and smoke. The verdict was decided before he even stood up. Guilty. Sentence: death by hanging. No grand torture. No drawn-out spectacle. Just a thick rope, a sturdy beam, and the simple mechanics of gravity doing its slow, ugly work. Vane didn't beg. He didn't weep. He didn't offer any last-minute conversion or plea for mercy from a god he'd spent his life spitting on. What the fuck would he even ask for? Forgiveness for the men whose guts he'd spilled hot and steaming across decks? Peace after years of carving his name into other people's nightmares with blade and fire? That wasn't who he was. Some men find God or regret at the end, their voices cracking as they whisper prayers while the noose tightens and their bladder lets go in fear. Vane didn't. He walked to the gallows the same way he had walked into every tavern brawl, every boarding action, every burning ship. Head up, eyes forward, jaw set like he was daring the world to try and break him one last time. The rope was rough hemp, already dark with the sweat, piss, and shit of the men who had swung there before him. It scraped his neck like sandpaper as they slipped the knot tight, the fibers digging into the skin and drawing tiny beads of blood. The trapdoor creaked under his bare feet, the wood warm from the sun. The crowd fell into that heavy, expectant hush, the kind that always settles right before something irreversible happens. Then the drop. No clean snap. No heroic instant end. The rope jerked taut with a dull thud. His body plunged, then stopped short. The noose bit deep, crushing his windpipe slowly instead of breaking the neck clean. His legs kicked instinctively, toes scraping empty air. His face purpled. Eyes bulged until the blood vessels burst, turning the whites red. A wet, choking gurgle escaped his crushed throat as his lungs fought desperately for air that would never come. His tongue swelled and protruded, dark and thick. His bladder let go in a hot stream, piss running down his leg and dripping from his toes while the crowd watched in silence. The body twitched and jerked in its death dance for long, agonizing minutes, heels drumming against the air, fingers clawing at nothing, until the movements grew weaker, slower, and finally stopped. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't cinematic. It was ugly, slow, and final. Exactly the kind of death the world gives men who refuse to kneel. And still, even as his body twitched its last and the light faded from those dead eyes, he never gave them what they wanted. No tears. No pleas. No final moment of weakness. He died the same way he had lived, unbroken, unbowed, still refusing to bend. When Charles Vane finally dropped through that trapdoor and the rope took his full weight, the crown got exactly what it thought it wanted. A body. A warning. A public lesson nailed into the bones of the Caribbean. This is what happens when you refuse to kneel. They left him swinging in the hot Port Royal sun for days, blackened tongue protruding thick and swollen, eyes pecked out by gulls until only empty, bloody sockets remained, piss and shit still staining his legs where they had run during the long, slow choke. The rope creaked softly in the breeze, the body twisting lazily like a side of meat left out to cure. Flies buzzed thick around the swollen face and the raw, rope-burned neck, laying eggs in the open sores. The stench of rotting flesh, sweet, heavy, and sickly, mixed with the salt air until even hardened sailors wrinkled their noses, covered their mouths, and hurried past. After a few days the skin began to split, gases bloating the belly until it burst with a wet pop, spilling dark fluid and maggots that dripped onto the ground below in thick strings. But messages don't always land the way the powerful intend. Vane didn't die like a man who had been conquered. He died like a man who had simply run out of time and bodies to kill. And those are two very different things. The British wanted a clean, final example, order triumphing over chaos, the monster strangled and silenced in front of a jeering crowd. Instead they got a corpse that refused to behave like a lesson. You can hang a man. You can let his body rot in the sun until the skin splits, the guts bloat and burst, and the maggots writhe in the open wounds. But you can't kill what lived behind the dead eyes. You can't hang the cold, quiet rage that had settled in his chest before he was even grown. Vane wasn't remembered for stolen gold or clever schemes or grand pirate empires. He was remembered for something far more dangerous and far harder to bury. He never fucking bent. Not for the crown's pardons. Not for his own crew's vote. Not for survival on a deserted island while hunger gnawed his guts and infection ate his flesh. Not even when the rope was already tight around his neck, his windpipe crushed, his own piss running down his leg, and his lungs burned for air that would never come. Other pirates adapted. They took the pardons, played the game, slipped away to die fat and quiet in some distant bed. Vane chose the hard road every single time, even when it was the stupid road, even when it led straight to a slow, choking death on a public gallows with his eyes bulging and his tongue turning black. And that refusal is what lingers like a splinter you can't dig out, working its way deeper with every heartbeat. There's something almost admirable in that kind of absolute defiance, raw, unfiltered, unbreakable. And something deeply fucked about it too, because it meant there was never any other ending possible for him. No redemption arc. No quiet peace. No slowing down to count the cost of all the throats he'd opened and all the ships he'd left burning with men screaming inside. Just fire until there was nothing left to burn. Long after the body was finally cut down, swollen, blackened, crawling with maggots, and tossed into a shallow grave, or fed to the sharks, depending on who tells the tale, his name kept moving. It traveled through smoke-filled taverns where men spoke it low, half curse and half warning, the words tasting like blood on the tongue. It rode the decks of ships cutting through black water at night, whispered like a spell that might summon him if spoken too loudly. It lived in the uneasy understanding that some men you simply do not try to control, because they would rather die spitting blood and shitting themselves on the end of a rope than live on their knees. What Vane left behind wasn't treasure or territory. It was an idea. A brutal, dangerous idea that still echoes louder the longer you sit with it. What if you just refused? Refused the rules. Refused the leash. Refused to kneel, even when the cost was everything, even when the rope was already biting into your neck, your face turning purple, your own piss running hot down your leg, and the last wet gurgle escaping your crushed throat. That's not a story with a happy ending. That's a story that ends with a swollen, swinging corpse, maggots dripping from burst flesh, and a name that still won't shut the hell up. And somewhere out there, in every quiet act of defiance, every time someone looks power in the face and says no, every moment a person chooses the fire over the easy meal, there's a little piece of Charles Vane still breathing, still angry, still unbroken, still whispering the same cold truth he lived and died by. No quarter. Not ever.